There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with a review of the novel Alberta Alone by Cora Sandel. This is the third and final volume in her Alberta trilogy. So it's kind of weird to be making a review of the final book in a series, but I'm going to do it anyway. I have separate reviews for the first volume, Alberta and Jacob. I read this 2 years ago. And the second volume I read a year ago, Alberta and Freedom, and now I have finished Alberta Alone. I am just filled with love and gratitude that this writer and this particular work of literature has come into my life because it has affected me so profoundly, and I just love Cora Sandel and her characters. This is a very autobiographical trilogy. I'm not going to spend very much time talking about what happens in this book, but just for a very, very brief recap. Volume 1 concerns Alberta's childhood, her young adulthood, growing up in the north of Norway with a very dysfunctional family and a very domineering mother, and Alberta, who is alter ego for Cora Sandel herself, wants to do something with her life but doesn't quite know what. And it was published in 1926. The second volume was published in 1931. And I didn't say yet, this trilogy and anything of Cora Sandel's that's available to us in English were translated from the Norwegian by Elizabeth Rokkan, and the translation is exquisite. The second volume, Alberta and Freedom, published 1931, set in pre-World War I Paris. We meet a young, but maybe mid-20s, late 20s, Alberta. She's in Paris, she's destitute, she is posing nude for painters for money just to pay the bills. She wants to be a writer, and under such dire circumstances, with a lot of creative freedom but impoverished circumstances, and dealing with all the misogynist crap that a pretty young woman in Paris would have to deal with, she is really having trouble finding the time, space, and motivation to write. Alberta Alone, it's quite a few years later, maybe 4 or 5 years later. This was published in 1939, and Alberta is still with the guy that she kind of got together with at the end of the second volume, Sivert, who is an artist. They are not married. They have a 8 or 9-year-old son. The story opens in Brittany, and she is staying in Brittany with friends, including a French writer. Her partner, Sivert, is back in Paris. This is a summer holiday place. She is alone with this French writer who is badly injured and psychologically wounded in World War I. And then more people come, including her partner Sivert and some other guys, and this French writer's wife. I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of names because you don't need them for the purposes of this review. And we can just see how lost Alberta is in this life that she finds herself with an ambivalent common law partner. Sivert is not somebody that loves her very much. It's obvious. And she's got this son who needs a lot of attention, and conflict between her and the boy's father over how to raise him right. And she is still just finding her dream of writing fiction to be so damned elusive, if not impossible. And that's what this novel is about. This novel is a mess, and I was thinking as I got about 3/4 of the way through it, maybe this one isn't as good as the other two. But by the time I got to the end, it's like, yes, it is. It's just as good. It's a beautiful ending to this series. We see Alberta hating herself, doubting herself, beating herself up, trying not to do those bad things to herself, and figure out what all these people around her actually mean to her and what she should do, and occasionally try to keep alive this dream to write and to actually find a room of one's own, a space in the day, on the seashore, in her home to write. And I'm just going to close with a 2-page excerpt about the writing. It's definitely my favorite passage in this entire book and one of my very favorites of the entire trilogy. And if that doesn't sell you, If this doesn't strike your fancy, it's not a book or a series for you. So they're in Brittany. She has been told on no uncertain terms that she's got an hour or something of free time. She should go down to the beach with her manuscripts and write, damn it! And this is what happens. She came down among the cliffs, found a place where there was a natural bench in the warm granite wall, seated herself comfortably, turned the pages of her manuscript. Duties towards imagined characters? In that case, they ought to be different from the ones with whom she had involved herself, a capricious, easily offended company, who never said or did anything when she sought them out, but attacked her at night, beside the Primus, at the child's bedside, and were gone again before she had time to turn round, who tried to arrest her attention when the living, who had every right, had already done so, and who expressed themselves vaguely in banal phrases and without profundity. Concentrate on her material? Alberta's material was fluctuating and billowing, a cloud formation illuminated now from this side, now from that, and which then disintegrated and disappeared, a mirage that vanished and was all of a sudden there again, a whirling nebula containing glimpses of voices, accents, faces, gestures, landscapes, streets, interiors, all of it appallingly like everyday life. If a thread lay hidden in it somewhere, it was well hidden. 10 lines that open up for the rest, Pierre had said. Alberta's misfortune was that almost any line could do that. She could approach her theme from one direction, or from another, or from yet a third. Then she had countless lines, paper piling up, full of words. Ill-behaved words that would not sound right together, would not be subservient, but had a frightful tendency to appear over and over again in proximity, to steal from each other. Words like suddenly, for instance, the most intrusive of them all. They resembled precious stones in that they were independent of their setting. Sievert had colors and broad brushes. He could work backwards and forwards over the canvas, hinting there, emphasizing there. Without getting in his own way, he could create a lucid frame within which to work. Alberta lost one glimpse for each that she was given, grasping at dots instead of outlines. Out of 2 hours daydreaming, perhaps 1 or 2 sentences would be released. Haphazard external impressions interfered, confused her, broke off the thread. She wished she were deaf and blind, wished she lay ill in bed, shut off from the outside world, so that she could concentrate. The result was that she fled from it all. Except in the strange, rare moments, when it seemed to her that this imperfect thing with which she had no patience, there was something to it after all. It was not yet in print. It was still possible to handle it, to approach it more closely, encircle another piece of fog. Alberta stopped turning the pages. What business had she here? She was playing truant from the things she was capable of doing, although with difficulty and badly, for something uncertain and elusive. She sat twisting her fountain pen and looking at the sea. The tide was coming in. With long, lazy tongues, the water licked at the land, creeping up behind and beneath the seaweed that grew round the smooth, slanting rocks, lifting it, rocking it, letting it float and dip, releasing it again, seizing it more greedily the next time. A wisp of cloud sailed around the sun. The enormous surface of milk and silk was changed at once into molten metal. The sand to the south and north dazzled the eye excruciatingly, as if the light were thrown down onto it by a shade. The screaming of the gulls took on a deeper tone. The wisp sailed on. The world lay there again, dissolved in heat haze. The sun was burning hot. A day for idling, for wandering, for living relaxed, without thought, without worry. A day from which to return renewed. Alberta leaned back against the granite wall and closed her eyes. She kicked off her sandals and let the folder slide off her lap. She heard a thud and a suspicious rustle of paper. Out of pure cussedness she did not look down, but continued to sit stretching her toes in the light, burning layer of sand that the wind took with it everywhere as soon as it blew. She thought, if a puff of wind comes and takes something with it out to sea, there's no harm done. A moment of dejection, the kind that drains away all one's strength, had come over her. Shortly she felt burning tears trickle from under her closed lids, down her cheeks, and into the low neckline of her dress. She gave way to them and found relief. She looked up for a second, but nobody was there. She could weep freely. She gave way completely and sobbed without so much as drawing a tear. I must stop going out alone, she thought. I shall have to stay near the house, minding my own business. Soon it will be time to bathe. I must go and look after Tot. It's my duty. Liesel can do it instead of me, and she does it better, but she shouldn't waste her time. I shall let myself drift on just the same in the current I have thrown myself into. The only person who can clear up the mess I have made of my life is myself, and I haven't the strength, the resources, the courage. She could hear the sound of the sea more clearly when she shut her eyes. It was good to sit still, to listen to it, giving rein to her tears and her misery. Many years ago she had sat like this, listening to the teeming sound of the sea as the tide came in, while her tears flowed and a great soothing emptiness melted away the rebellion in her. Her longing for life, her disappointment in it, the sea was suited to both. She had ended up composing poetry that time. Poetry. So you need to read this book to find out whether Alberta summons up the strength, the resources, the courage to fulfill her creative yearnings. It's a wonderful book. It's a wonderful trilogy. Thanks for watching.